Okay, it is May 25th of 2023, and this is the Spring Loop path here at Havenwood, the springtime video of the Spring Loop path. Essentially, these videos are being made because it looks as though I could very well not be the steward of this land. I'd always had a dream that I would be the steward of this land and open it to the public. As kind of a peace sanctuary, rescue some farm animals, have a dog hospice, and open the trails that I've been working on intensively for the last 4 years to the public, because it's such a peaceful place. And, you know, life is what it is, and it's been looking like that's never going to happen or not going to happen, and so I thought, you know, what could I do to open it to the public? And of course, then these videos came to mind. So there are 3 primary paths. Each one of them gets a walk with commentary, talking about some of their features and how I built them and some interesting parts of them. And then the same path walked again in silence, so that any and all of you can either hear my thoughts on how the paths are maintained or built, and or walk them in silence whenever you want. So this is the Spring Loop path. It combines a path that comes up here from the main house to a animal companion cemetery, and then past an old house pad where an old log cabin used to be on the property back in the 1800s, and then it loops around past the main spring where the people who lived in that cabin got their fresh water, and down along the tributary, the stream that runs from the spring to the lake down there. And I just call this, the combination of all those paths there, the Spring Loop. So yeah. So that's what we'll be doing now. I think all the different parts of the land have been cleared at various times. This was a February 2 years ago job here, this corner. It opened up really nicely. All of this land, which you can see at the beginning of the Blue Path video with commentary, there's a really good section, a really good example of one acre of land here that has not been cleared yet, and you can see how all of this used to look. It was all choked off and thick, and you could hardly see 5 feet in. And yeah, the reason why I started to and continued to clear out and cleanse, for lack of a better term, these 22 acres was because you know, when land is abused by humans, it tries to heal, and it tries to heal rapidly. And so in this area of the world, when land is clear-cut or used for animal agriculture, or in this case it was also, along with those two things, it was also mined for iron ore, the land tries to heal itself by rapid, really thick, chaotic growth. And with the goal of then having storms and droughts and animals and heavy rainfall or not so heavy rainfall, or competition between trees, end up weeding out the less adaptable, the less ideally suited individuals, and leaving land that eventually, after 300, 400, 500 years, starts to look like this, spaced out like this. So the reason why I'm doing this, or have been doing this, is not to make it better or more beautiful, though it does feel much more beautiful to me and to many people who visit here. It's essentially to give nature a boost, to help her do in 4 years what otherwise she would have done better than me, admittedly, in 400. So that's the impetus, that's the inspiration behind this work. The thought also was that one day people would come and visit in droves maybe, or in smatterings, who knows, and be inspired by the beauty to go forth in their own lives and cherish land and all of the sentient animal residents of the land. and kind of get back to a more respectful relationship with nature, which our species has definitely lost almost completely these days. So that's kind of the why of the matter. But this area is a really interesting area. This was a lot of, I didn't have to do too much dropping of pine trees here. Most of this was all, it blew down in a big storm, and I had cleared all of the fallen pines out here and made these critter houses. That right there also is a mining ditch, an erosion ditch, so I filled that in. Anytime you see one of those piles of brush, that's most of the time over an erosion ditch or a gully that's losing topsoil. And so with the brush in there, it not only makes a house for animals, but over 200, 300, 400 years, it melts into dirt and evens the land backs out and halts erosion. It's pretty much good for everybody. So then this was huge. Underneath that big brush pile is like a 6-foot deep hole in the dirt. Huge. And that's all filled with a lot of these pine trees that I hacked up here. And just as I was walking down here to make this video, a rabbit just ran out and ran right underneath there. So there are animals living in all of these piles of brush, of course. But there's definitely a big family of rabbits living right there. And so that's kind of neat. This path used to be called Twin Pine Path, because right here there was a humongous pine tree with the double trunk that went up like this, and in a windstorm it blew down here and here, kind of marking the path. And so I left those trunks there to kind of serve as a guide for the path. And then here to the right is where almost all of the beautiful, wonderful animal residents who have lived here at Havenwood are buried. It's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dogs and 1 cat are honored here, and then 1 other cat and 1 other dog have been buried elsewhere. Yeah, but each one of these graves has its own little tale. Maybe I'll make a video about each of the animal residents here. They were all very, very special, and that is definitely worthy of a video at another time. But anyway, interestingly enough as well here, there was a huge pine tree, about 3 feet in diameter. As a reference point, that's about, it was like twice as big around as that pine tree. It was a big one. And it was growing up here, and it had fallen over in a windstorm and been held up by that oak tree and that cherry tree. And eventually then, months later, it got too heavy and it exploded that oak tree and that cherry tree and fell. It just really big here, right here, almost right where I'm standing. And it dropped all the way up to there. So I diced it up with my chainsaw and a Stihl 391, if anyone's interested. And then put all of the rounds, the really heavy pine rounds of the trunk, in kind of a serpentine wall there, and covered them with brush to kind of give this this main path over here. The blue path runs right over there, and it kind of give a little gentle barrier between the two, and provide residence for who knows how many hundreds of my animal friends. Runs all the way up to there. Eventually the thought was there's one other big pine about to fall, I'll show you here, up here, and I would dice it up and make it one big kind of serpentine wall, which again in 200, 300, 400 years will melt down to an earth berm. It would be really cool. Before we move on too, it's really cool to see what happens with storms here with pine trees. Pines grow first after a land has been kind of raped and pillaged by humans. They grow really quickly, they grow really fast, they're really heavy, and they have really shallow root balls. So they blow over a lot in storms, and when storms catch their tops and twist them like the storms do here, they blow out. So this pine tree here, this happened about 2 years ago. It got twisted, snapped, and fell right here. This one's recent. This tree right here, you can see up there, it's kind of hard to see, it's about to fall actually. Storm took it, twisted the top, and snapped it, and it fell on top of this huge pine tree, which about 1.5 years ago got twisted by a storm. Look at that. I mean, that's a lot of force. So the storm took that tree, twisted it, exploded, and it fell over here on these other trees. So this is similar to how a lot of the land looked for many years here, with a lot of blowdown like this, a lot of it fallen down on the ground. And then, of course, over the last 30 years, bit by bit, and most intensively the last 4, I've come in here with the chainsaw and I've been able to cut up all these fallen pine trees and make all of these wonderful houses. That's where the rabbit ran in right there. That's where the rabbits are living. That's probably the most cherished animal property on the land. That's like Park Avenue. This is where they all want to live, right here. Anyway, I digress. So at some point, I got to get in here with the chainsaw. This is kind of a dangerous drop. That's a lot of tension on all these trees. So this is kind of tricky, and I'm not too anxious to tackle this one until they fall a little more on their own. But anyway, when they do, I'll get in here and I'll clean them up like I do everything else. So anyway, head up this way. And this is, you can kind of see what happens when these big pines fall. They get so top heavy that when the wind blows through, you see that huge pine tree right there just ripping out of the ground. And it will eventually, when it's not being held up enough by other pine trees or other trees, it will just fall right over and rip this huge hole out of the ground. And then I'll cut up the trunk and I'll connect this brush pile and have it kind of serpentine up and connect with that one over there that I made. And it'll be a nice little separation between the blue path and this spring loop path. Here's one of my favorite trees. I like all the trees. I'm not really a big discriminator when it comes to trees, but there are certain trees that do cause you to really pause and wonder, and this big red oak is something special. This is a pretty amazing tree. Very old. Fortunately was not cut by humans, at least not for the last couple of 100 years. It's a really amazing tree. And then eventually, you know, in 100, 200 years from now, as this continues to thin out on its own, there will be, and if humans don't come and screw it up, of course, fingers crossed everyone, that the next owners of the land, I don't like using the word owners because, you know, we're all guests here. No one owns land. Private property is a ridiculous myth created by greedy humans. But still, the next residents here might just be inspired to cherish this place and care for it. In which case, in 100, 200 years, there will be a lot of trees that big around here. It'll be really even more magical than it is now. So roughly here is in the 1800s is where the log cabin was, and there was a really steep path that went down this hill and zigzagged down this hill to the spring, which we will get to in a moment, which is right down there where the fresh water source is. And that path was just too sketchy for guests to walk, so I closed it off and made this path instead. And eventually I was hoping to put in a set of stairs that will swoop down this hillside to the base of the spring. That would take quite a bit of time, but that would be a really pretty staircase, and that's on the someday list. But this is where the 1800s residents used to live, or at least some of them, right in here apparently was where the cabin was. And they planted this super spiky stuff on purpose as kind of a defensive hedge, and it has done really well here. I had to prune all this out. This was just a mass. It was impenetrable about 2 years ago, and I came in and took a hit for the team, many hits, pruning this thorny stuff out and piling it on these brush piles, these animal houses back here. It smells nice in the spring. It flowers and it has beautiful oranges. I don't know. Here's one about that's going to become one of these fruits. They're too bitter to eat, apparently. But this was planted, I believe, by the residents who used to live right here. So here now the orange path, which is what we just completed, blends into the blue path, which we'll visit again in the blue path video. But if we curve down here to the left, so this blue path runs back to the main house and the Airbnb apartment, barn apartment that way, and it comes up here, and then the blue path curves up the hill, which we'll get to, as I said, in the blue path video. But the spring loop path curves here at this intersection down to the light blue spring path, and this runs along a drainage erosion gully, a mining ditch gully, to the spring, and then along a rivulet that runs from the spring all the way to the lake. But I'll show you that. This hillside is astounding. I just recently finished clearing this out, at least this phase of it, just this last year. And it was mostly spaced like this. I didn't have to do too much felling or pruning here, but there was a lot of trash. It was just rotting logs and branches, and it was a real mess. And so I gathered that mess and consolidated it in this critter house right here, and then several other very large critter houses, one of which back up in there, if you look closely enough, that's a pretty big one. That's prime real estate there for bunnies and mice, and those little house wrens love those things, and chipmunks go crazy for those guys. It's kind of good. It's open like this, so you have all these critter houses, which helps protect the prey animals, the herbivores, and they can live in there safely and then go out to forage. But then it's also wide open, which I would assume makes it that much easier for the prey animals to swoop in, the owls and the foxes to come in and hunt. Pretty sure everyone's pretty thrilled about this work. I definitely, you can sit quietly and watch, and you can definitely tell that the animals that are around sure seem to be enjoying themselves. This is a really beautiful hillside with all these ferns, and now that it's opened up just a little bit with more sunlight, I think we're going to see more and more ferns come up. Hopefully that'll happen. This path here erodes pretty severely in rainfalls, and so eventually I'm going to have to get some railroad ties and berm it on the way down and keep funneling the water into this ditch over here to the left, so it doesn't erode all the way out. It's not good for the trees to have all their roots exposed like this either. But this mining gully, erosion ditch, starts right here. It's pretty deep, actually. It's only a couple of feet deep there, but it gets to 4 or 5 feet deep on the way down, and it goes all the way down to the spring, which was really handy. So all the work I did here, I just piled it right in there. And so animals live in there now, and then eventually that also will melt into dirt and try to start to fill in that gully and to kind of raise that land up to have it blend in and not be as much of an erosion problem. Come on down here. Just like the other paths too, if we could get some more foot traffic on here, not only would these ferns keep popping up here, but this would all eventually, if I can get the erosion, the water to run here as opposed to here, this will all moss over. And this will just be like a moss staircase. Probably would take 50 years, but that's definitely a doable thing. Just gotta, one thing after another. There's always something to do. So, for those of you who have seen the perimeter path videos, this is where the silent perimeter path starts and where the commentary perimeter path video ends. It goes off to the right and then circumnavigates all the rest of the land. And then right here, the perimeter path joins the spring path and continues all the way to the lake, which is what we'll do now. Here to the left is the spring. That's where, I don't know how many gallons a minute come out of there. It's hard to tell now, but there is water constantly coming out of there and running from here all the way along this little stream to the lake. This is one of the 7 springs that feeds the freshwater lake. And again, this is where the residents in the 1800s would walk down to get their water. And for those of you who have read the tribute to Todd that I wrote, the tribute to my brother, one of the chapters is about the work he did on this spring. And this is where he did the work. That's some of his work. These monuments here he set. And this big granite slab here was was where he made the primary waterfall. And that was all dug out, and this was a beautiful waterfall he made here. It didn't last very long because the land is so porous, the water just ended up running around the granite. But he worked really hard here. So for those of you who've read that book, this is where Todd was doing all that great work. And a lot of what he did, the work that he did, it remains, vestiges of our work. If we really are working hard to make things beautiful, parts of our labor do remain, A lot of the piece of this place is still here from all the work that he did. Yeah. So then here is the beginning. You can kind of see what I've kind of been marking out. This is where I want to put stairs in to curve up the hill to connect the path where we just were, to be able to smoothly come down and sit here by the spring without having to go all the way around. That's, of course, a large project for another day. But it really is pretty, isn't it? Let's take a little panorama here. It's a beautiful glen. This is the neighbor's property, the line. Pretty much at the stream here is the property line. And the secondary still, when you watch the Blue Path video, you'll see the major production facility for alcohol in this entire county back in the days of Prohibition was on the land behind me. But over here was a secondary still where they had like a backup moonshine producer, and that's that metal you see right there is that still that was axed up by the sheriff. The sheriff came and broke up the operation way back in the day. I don't know exactly when that was, to be honest. I'm not exactly sure. I think Dade County was a dry county for a long time. I think that could have been as recently as the 60s or 50s when that happened. Not sure. But so here we are, continuing on. And here's the little spring. So this is without heavy rainfall. This shows you how much water is coming out of that spring. You can kind of tell. Not a lot, but not a little. And it's constant. And when the rains fall, of course, it's much more. But this is pretty normal. This is a pretty standard amount that pretty constantly, regardless of rainfall, flows out from the ground there. Funny story here. My brother and I came down here once and were cleaning out this stream, and we ran it straight here and connected it to another spring closer to the lake, not realizing that the property value was apparently determined by the stream. And so this whole promontory here, this peninsula, we essentially, with our work, legally gave to the neighbors. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, no one's like that around here. No one's raising a stink. Everybody knows what's what and respects each other for the most part. But it was still pretty funny. And then what I just recently did is this, where I put it back where it was. It still seeps through a little bit, but eventually over time that's going to go back, and I let the rivulet continue onward where it was before. And to help it fill in, you'll see here, I'll go up a little further and I'll show you better right up here. There was a lot of tree fall here up to the left while I cleared all this beautiful land out. This is all lovely, isn't it? It's just lovely. Really is pretty. Beautiful hillside. And so when I got a hold of those fallen pines that were all up in there, a lot of them anyway, or a few of them actually, I chunked up. And I either put in piles, which you just saw, or I kind of threw them into this stream that my brother and I made to fill it in. And eventually that will fill in as leaves fall on it and dirt comes, and that will turn back into land eventually. I mean, it'd be kind of nice to put like a big octagonal patio out there, a raised wooden deck there to sit on. It's a really nice place. You can kind of clear out some of that brush over there, make it really pretty. That could be a really sweet spot. Anyway, on we go. Now we're getting closer to the lake. You can kind of see it in the distance there. And here, at this point, the spring we were just at joins with another main spring, which comes down there, and it joins with our spring, which comes through here and flows to the lake. And then there's another spring, I think, over here, and I think there are 4 springs under the lake itself feeding the lake. And this area here was this promontory here blending into the next one. I mean, as of 2 years ago, was filled with spiky vines, thorns, just horrible, so thick you couldn't even see the lake. And that took quite a bit of work to cut them all out. They're coming back. You see this buddy right here, this guy. Heavens to Betsy, just thousands of these all in here. And once I cleared it out, it's really pretty. Those are flowering irises, lilies, something. They have yellow flowers, those big reedy things. And when the Canada geese come, sometimes they hang out on this promontory. I saw one Canada geese. Oh, that was a great blue heron. I don't know if you can see it. He just flew over there. We got a great blue heron that lives here. He was fishing. I disturbed him. Sorry, dude. But the Canada geese sometimes will come here and attempt to nest here. It's not the safest place, so no pair has ever actually nested here, but you'll see them hanging out here, giving it a look-see when they migrate through. And here's the lake. And the Havenwood property line pretty much runs right down from the stream, right down the middle of the lake. And then the front 10 acres is mostly landscaped. There's an orchard and a vineyard and bushes and lawns, and it's, more standard property. But the part I focus on is the woods. So, that's basically it. We'll come right up here around the corner, and then this is the spring loop path is essentially walked. And I think I've pretty much covered. I mean, there's always something I forget to say. There's so many different stories and interesting things to look at, like this water oak right here. Or is that a normal oak? Is that a white oak? I think that's a water oak. I mean, that is an interesting tree. I've been cutting off the lower limbs to save weight to try to keep it from falling over. So far, so good. But anyway, there's always something cool to look at and to talk about or witness. But that's the spring loop path, which ends up here at this bi-trunk water oak right up here with the dots on it. So I'll get to that point, and then I'll turn off the video, and then I'll turn around and I'll walk it back in silence. All right. Enjoy, friends.